The phone call that shattered Michael Harris's carefully rebuilt world came at 11:37 on a rain-soaked Thursday evening in October 2024, delivered by Indian-American journalist Priya Kapoor, whose voice trembled with the weight of impossible news. "Miss Harris, I need you to sit down because what I'm about to tell you will change everything you believed about your wife's death 8 years ago." Michael's grip tightened on his coffee mug as Priya's words penetrated the comfortable silence of his Denver apartment, where photographs of Anjali Mehra Harris still adorned the mantelpiece like shrines to a love story that had supposedly ended in twisted metal and flames on a remote Mexican highway in December 2016. The official accident report had described a tragic collision during their second honeymoon trip, leaving behind only charred remains, too damaged for proper identification, and a grieving husband whose world had collapsed in a single devastating phone call from Mexican authorities. "Your wife, Anjali, is alive," Priya continued, her journalist training barely containing the emotional magnitude of her revelation. "She's been living in Buenos Aires under the name Sofia Martinez for the past 7 years, working as a translator and living with a restaurant owner named Carlos Dominguez, who has no idea about her real identity or the husband she left behind in America." The silence that followed stretched like a chasm between Michael's past and present, 8 years of carefully constructed grief, threatening to crumble as his mind struggled to process information that violated every assumption he had built about love, loss, and the woman who had shared his bed for 3 years before vanishing into what he believed was eternal darkness. The photographs on his mantelpiece seemed to mock him now, their frozen smiles hiding secrets that had survived longer than his marriage itself. Michael had met Anjali during her final semester at Colorado State University, where she was completing her master's degree in international business, while he worked as a civil engineer for the city's infrastructure development department. Their courtship had been a careful dance between his straightforward American pragmatism and her complex cultural identity, which seemed to shift between her Mumbai childhood and her New York adolescence, like water flowing between different vessels. The marriage that followed 18 months later had been a celebration of cross-cultural love, attended by his blue-collar Denver family and her sophisticated relatives who flew in from both coasts, creating a wedding album filled with images that now seemed like evidence of an elaborate performance rather than authentic joy. Anjali had worn both a traditional white gown and a stunning red lehenga, transforming between identities with an ease that should have warned him about her capacity for fundamental deception. Their 3 years together had been marked by subtle tensions that Michael had attributed to normal adjustment challenges faced by intercultural couples navigating different expectations about family, career, and personal autonomy. Anjali's restlessness had manifested in late-night phone calls conducted in rapid Hindi, sudden interest in travel documentaries about South America, and an increasing preoccupation with financial independence that had puzzled Michael but never triggered serious concern about her commitment to their shared future. The Mexico trip that had supposedly claimed her life had been Anjali's idea, a second honeymoon designed to reconnect after a period of growing distance that both had acknowledged, but neither had been willing to examine too closely. The resort she had chosen was remote and romantic, perfect for the intimate renewal she claimed to desire, though Michael now realized it had been selected for entirely different reasons related to its proximity to transportation networks that could facilitate her escape rather than their reconciliation. The phone call from Mexican authorities had arrived 3 days into their vacation, delivered by an official whose heavily accented English had made the devastating news even more surreal, as Michael struggled to understand how his wife could have been driving alone on a dangerous mountain road at dawn when he remembered falling asleep beside her after their final evening together. The investigation that followed had been hampered by jurisdictional complexities and the remote location of the accident, leaving many questions unanswered, despite the certainty of official death certificates and insurance payouts. The grief that had consumed Michael for 8 years had been complicated by nagging doubts about details that never quite aligned with his memories of their final hours together, though his trauma-induced reluctance to investigate further had prevented him from pursuing answers that might have challenged the official narrative of tragic accident. His mother, Linda's persistent suspicions about Anjali's secretive behavior had been dismissed as cultural misunderstanding and protective maternal instinct, rather than legitimate concerns about his wife's hidden agenda and capacity for elaborate deception. The investigation that led Priya Kapoor to discover Anjali's survival began 6 months earlier when she was researching immigration fraud patterns for a documentary series about identity theft among first-generation Americans who struggled with cultural identity and legal status pressures that sometimes drove them to desperate measures involving false documentation and systematic deception of family members and government authorities. Priya's background as the daughter of Indian immigrants had given her unique insight into the psychological pressures faced by women caught between traditional family expectations and American individualism, particularly those who felt trapped by arranged marriages or cultural obligations that conflicted with their personal ambitions and desires for autonomy that their parents' generation could not understand or accept. The pattern recognition software that Priya used to analyze immigration records had flagged an anomaly in the case of Sofia Martinez, whose application for permanent residency in Argentina contained biographical details that matched too closely with missing person reports filed in multiple American jurisdictions, suggesting either an elaborate coincidence or systematic identity theft by someone with sophisticated knowledge of document forgery and international legal procedures. The facial recognition analysis that Priya commissioned through her network of investigative journalists revealed a 94% probability match between recent photographs of Sofia Martinez taken outside a Buenos Aires cafe and archived images of Anjali Mehra Harris from social media accounts that had been deleted shortly before her supposed death, indicating either an impossible resurrection or an elaborate fraud that had successfully deceived authorities in multiple countries for nearly a decade. Detective Rosa Alvarez of the Buenos Aires Metropolitan Police had been monitoring suspicious identity documents as part of an international task force investigating human trafficking and document fraud, though her initial interest in Sofia Martinez had been routine verification rather than investigation into what would become one of the most complex cases of staged death and identity theft in recent Argentine law enforcement history. The surveillance operation that Rosa authorized revealed that Sofia Martinez lived a comfortable middle-class lifestyle with Carlos Dominguez, a respected restaurant owner whose establishment had become popular among expatriate Americans and Europeans seeking authentic Argentine cuisine in an atmosphere that celebrated cultural diversity rather than demanding assimilation, local customs, and expectations. Carlos Dominguez's complete ignorance of his partner's real identity became apparent during preliminary interviews, where his genuine shock and cooperation with investigators demonstrated that he had been as thoroughly deceived as Michael Harris, though his victimization was complicated by his romantic relationship with someone whose entire persona had been constructed through criminal deception and systematic fraud. The financial investigation revealed that Anjali had systematically drained joint bank accounts and liquidated shared assets during the weeks before her supposed death, transferring substantial sums through cryptocurrency exchanges and offshore accounts to fund her new life in South America, while ensuring that her disappearance would appear to be the result of tragic accident rather than premeditated. Abandonment and theft. The insurance fraud that accompanied Anjali's staged death had netted her partner several $100,000 that he had donated to charity in her memory, creating a public record of his grief and good intentions that made his eventual discovery of her survival even more psychologically devastating and emotionally complex than simple romantic betrayal. The timeline reconstruction revealed that Anjali had spent months preparing her disappearance through careful research into Mexican accident investigation procedures, Argentine immigration policies, and document forgery techniques that would enable her to establish a new identity without detection by international law enforcement agencies or private investigators who might be hired by her abandoned family. Call to action. Diese schockierende Enthüllungszeit. We wait Menschen gehen können, ihr Wehrsgesicht zu verbergen. Wenn Sie mehr über solche unglaublichen Fälle von Betrug und falscher Identität erfahren möchten, abonnieren Sie unseren Kanal für weitere True Crime Dokumentationen, die dunklen Geheimnis hinter scheinbar normalen Beziehungen aufdecken. The confrontation between Michael and Anjali took place at the Buenos Aires police station, where she had been detained pending extradition proceedings, a sterile environment that seemed cruelly inappropriate for a reunion between spouses whose relationship had been severed by what one believed was death and the other knew was calculated abandonment, designed to facilitate her escape from marital obligations, and cultural expectations she could no longer tolerate. Michael's journey to Argentina had been financed through emergency savings and credit that would take years to repay. Though the financial burden seemed insignificant compared to the emotional preparation required for facing someone whose supposed death had defined his existence for 8 years, while she built a new life with another man who knew nothing about the devastation she had left behind in Denver. The physical changes in Anjali were immediately apparent when Michael saw her across the interrogation room table, reflecting not only natural aging, but deliberate alterations to her appearance that had been designed to support her false identity as Sofia Martinez, including hair color modifications, cosmetic dental work, and subtle surgical enhancements that had transformed her face enough to evade casual recognition while maintaining her fundamental attractiveness. The explanation that Anjali provided for her actions combined claims about feeling suffocated by American suburban life with assertions about cultural identity crisis that had made her previous existence feel like an inauthentic performance rather than genuine self-expression, though her justifications seemed carefully rehearsed rather than spontaneous emotional revelation about psychological struggles that had driven her to desperate measures. The emotional manipulation that Anjali employed during their confrontation was sophisticated and calculated, designed to generate sympathy for her alleged mental health struggles, while minimizing responsibility for the devastating impact of her deception on Michael and his family, who had spent 8 years mourning her loss and struggling to understand how such tragedy could have occurred during what should have been a romantic celebration of their marriage. The details of her escape plan revealed months of preparation that included research into international banking procedures, document forgery techniques, and destination countries, where she could establish a new identity without being detected by family members or law enforcement agencies, demonstrating a level of premeditation that contradicted her claims about impulsive decision-making driven by psychological crisis rather than criminal intent. The financial crimes that accompanied her disappearance included systematic theft of marital assets, insurance fraud, and tax evasion that had enabled her to maintain a comfortable lifestyle in Buenos Aires, while Michael struggled with both emotional devastation and the practical challenges of rebuilding his life as a supposed widower whose grief had been compounded by financial stress and social isolation. Michael's emotional response to seeing Anjali alive oscillated between relief at her survival and rage at her betrayal, creating a psychological conflict that was complicated by his realization that the woman he had mourned was essentially a fictional character created through her systematic deception, rather than the authentic person he believed he had known and loved completely. The legal complexities surrounding Anjali's arrest involved multiple jurisdictions and criminal charges, ranging from fraud and identity theft to conspiracy and money laundering, creating procedural challenges that would require extensive international cooperation and legal resources that neither Michael nor his family could easily afford, despite the obvious justice of their cause. The impact on Carlos Dominguez was profound and immediate, as he struggled to reconcile the woman he had lived with for 7 years with the systematic criminal who had built their entire relationship on lies about her identity, background, and availability for authentic emotional connection, forcing him to question every memory of their shared experiences and future plans. The media attention that the case attracted brought widespread coverage of staged disappearances and identity fraud, highlighting the sophisticated techniques that could be employed by individuals seeking to escape their responsibilities, while causing devastating emotional damage to family members who were left to mourn fabricated deaths and struggle with unanswered questions about their loved ones' final moments. The psychological evaluation that was ordered by Argentine authorities revealed personality disorders and antisocial traits that explained Anjali's capacity for maintaining intimate relationships while systematically deceiving the people who trusted her most, including her ability to express convincing love and commitment while planning criminal activities that would destroy the lives of those who believed in her authenticity and devotion to their shared future. The criminal investigation expanded beyond Anjali's individual actions to examine the networks that had assisted her disappearance and identity theft, revealing connections to professional document forgers and money laundering operations that specialized in helping individuals escape their previous lives while establishing new identities that could withstand scrutiny from law enforcement and immigration authorities. The international cooperation required for prosecuting Anjali's crimes involved law enforcement agencies in the United States, Mexico, and Argentina, creating jurisdictional challenges that required careful coordination of evidence, gathering, and witness testimony across different legal systems, while addressing various criminal charges that applied to her activities in multiple countries. The victim impact statements that were prepared by Michael and his mother documented the comprehensive damage caused by Anjali's deception, including not only obvious emotional trauma, but also practical consequences of living for years under the shadow of grief and the social isolation that resulted from Michael's inability to move forward while he remained psychologically attached to someone who had deliberately caused his suffering. The financial restitution proceedings were complicated by the international nature of Anjali's crimes and the sophisticated methods she had used to hide assets across multiple banking systems and jurisdictions, making complete recovery of stolen funds unlikely, despite extensive efforts by forensic accountants and asset recovery specialists who worked to trace her financial activities. Detective Rosa Alvarez's investigation revealed that Anjali's case was part of a larger pattern of staged disappearances involving individuals who used sophisticated document fraud and identity theft to escape family obligations, debt, or legal troubles, while causing devastating emotional damage to relatives who believed they had died in accidents or other tragic circumstances. The psychological treatment that Michael began during the legal proceedings addressed the complex trauma associated with discovering that his most intimate relationship had been based on systematic deception, requiring specialized therapeutic approaches for rebuilding his capacity for trust and emotional intimacy after experiencing such fundamental betrayal by someone he had loved completely. The cultural implications of the case extended beyond individual crime to include examination of pressures faced by immigrant women who struggled with identity conflicts between traditional family expectations and American individualism. Though Anjali's criminal response to these challenges was condemned by cultural advocates who emphasized constructive approaches to resolving such conflicts. The legal precedents established through Anjali's prosecution influenced how similar cases would be investigated and prosecuted in the future, creating frameworks for international cooperation and victim protection that would benefit other families dealing with staged disappearances and elaborate identity fraud schemes that exploited cultural differences and family trust. The sentencing phase focused on determining appropriate punishment that would reflect both the financial scope of Anjali's crimes and the psychological damage she had inflicted on multiple victims, while also considering the international implications of the case and its potential deterrent effect on others who might consider similar criminal activities involving staged death and identity theft. Carlos Dominguez's cooperation with investigators continued throughout the legal proceedings as he provided detailed information about Anjali's behavior and activities during their 7-year relationship. Though his testimony was complicated by his emotional attachment to someone whose entire identity had been constructed through criminal deception and systematic fraud, the ongoing investigation into criminal networks revealed that while Anjali had been successfully apprehended and prosecuted, similar operations continued to evolve and adapt their techniques to exploit new technologies and social platforms while incorporating traditional methods that remained difficult for conventional law enforcement to detect and counter effectively. The civil litigation that followed Anjali's criminal conviction enabled Michael to pursue additional compensation for the comprehensive psychological and financial damage she had caused, while also establishing legal precedents for holding criminals accountable for the long-term emotional impact of elaborate deception schemes that exploited marital trust and cultural expectations for predatory purposes. The international media coverage of the trial brought sustained attention to the phenomenon of staged disappearances and identity fraud, highlighting the sophisticated criminal techniques that enabled individuals to evade detection while living under false identities in foreign countries where their true backgrounds were unknown to local authorities and social contacts who became unwitting accomplices to their deception. The victim advocacy work that emerged from Michael's case included specialized organizations dedicated to supporting families affected by staged disappearances, while also lobbying for legislative changes that would enhance protection for potential victims and improve law enforcement capabilities for investigating such sophisticated criminal schemes that crossed international boundaries. The psychological research that was inspired by the case contributed to enhanced understanding of the long-term impact of systematic deception on victims' mental health and their ability to form trusting relationships, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions for individuals recovering from fundamental betrayal by people they had loved and trusted completely. Linda Harris's vindication regarding her early suspicions about Anjali created complex family dynamics, as Michael was forced to acknowledge that his mother's concerns had been legitimate rather than cultural prejudice. Though their relationship was strengthened through shared experience of victimization and mutual support during the difficult legal and emotional recovery process. The financial recovery efforts extended over several years, as investigators worked to trace assets that had been hidden or spent by Anjali during her years in Argentina, with partial success in recovering some funds, while also establishing important legal mechanisms for pursuing criminals who had fled to foreign countries after committing elaborate financial crimes. The community response in Denver reflected broader cultural tensions about immigration, identity, and trust within multicultural relationships, though most reactions emphasized sympathy for Michael's victimization rather than broader generalizations about intercultural marriage or immigrant communities that had no connection to Anjali's individual criminal behavior. The technological solutions that were developed in response to the case included better systems for detecting identity fraud and monitoring suspicious financial activities, while also providing tools for families and law enforcement agencies to verify identities and track individuals who might be living under false documentation in foreign countries. The international cooperation that had been essential for investigating Anjali's crimes continued through ongoing efforts to monitor and disrupt criminal networks that specialized in identity theft and staged disappearances, while also sharing intelligence about emerging techniques and operational methods used by criminals seeking to evade detection across international boundaries. The educational initiatives that grew from the case included programs designed to help individuals and families recognize warning signs of potential deception, while also providing information about legal protections and investigative resources available to people who suspected they might be victims of systematic fraud or identity theft by trusted family members. The policy changes that resulted from advocacy efforts included enhanced verification procedures for death certificates and missing person cases, improved coordination between agencies investigating financial crimes and staged disappearances, and strengthened international agreements for pursuing criminals who exploited jurisdictional boundaries to evade accountability. The ongoing psychological treatment that Michael received addressed not only the trauma of Anjali's betrayal, but also the complex process of rebuilding his identity as someone whose fundamental beliefs about love, trust, and human nature had been shattered by discovering that his most intimate relationship had been based entirely on criminal deception and systematic manipulation. The relationship between Michael and Dr. Sarah Chen, the trauma specialist who became his long-term therapist, evolved into a professional partnership focused on understanding and treating the unique psychological damage caused by elaborate deception within intimate relationships, contributing to academic research and treatment protocols that would benefit other victims of similar crimes. The establishment of the Michael Harris Foundation, 3 years after Anjali's conviction, represented his transformation from victim to advocate, creating a permanent institution dedicated to supporting families affected by staged disappearances, while also funding research and prevention programs that address the sophisticated techniques used by criminals to exploit family, relationships, and cultural expectations. The annual conference on staged disappearances that the foundation sponsored brought together survivors, law enforcement officials, researchers, and policymakers from around the world to share knowledge about criminal techniques, while also developing more effective prevention strategies and support services that address the unique challenges posed by such elaborate deception schemes. The research initiatives that the foundation funded contributed to enhanced understanding of the psychological and social factors that motivated staged disappearances, while also advancing knowledge about effective prevention strategies and therapeutic interventions for individuals and families recovering from the discovery that their most trusted relationships had been based on systematic deception. The victim support services that the foundation operated included specialized counseling for families affected by staged disappearances, legal assistance for navigating complex international legal proceedings, and practical guidance for financial and identity recovery processes that could extend for years after the initial discovery of criminal deception by trusted family members. The educational materials that the Foundation produced provided practical information about recognizing warning signs of potential deception, while also raising awareness about the sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques used by criminals to exploit family trust and cultural expectations for elaborate fraud schemes that crossed international boundaries. The corporate consulting services that the Foundation provided included risk assessment and fraud prevention training for organizations that might encounter individuals using false identities or engaging in systematic deception, while also supporting legitimate businesses that needed to verify customer identities and detect potential fraud without compromising privacy rights. The international cooperation initiatives that the Foundation supported included enhanced intelligence sharing between law enforcement agencies and improved protocols for investigating missing person cases that might involve criminal and deception, while also providing resources for diplomatic cooperation in pursuing criminals who had fled to foreign countries after staging their disappearances. The psychological treatment protocols that were developed through Foundation research provided specialized approaches for helping families recover from staged disappearances, while also addressing the cultural and social factors that could make certain individuals vulnerable to exploitation by criminals who understood how to exploit traditional values and family expectations for predatory purposes. The technology initiatives that the Foundation supported included development of better systems for detecting identity fraud and preventing staged disappearances, while also providing tools for families and investigators to verify identities and track suspicious activities that might indicate criminal planning or systematic deception by trusted individuals. The legislative achievements that resulted from the Foundation's advocacy work included enhanced penalties for staged disappearances and identity fraud, improved victim compensation programs, and strengthened international cooperation requirements that facilitated investigation and prosecution of criminals who exploited jurisdictional boundaries to evade accountability for their actions. The ongoing monitoring of criminal networks revealed that while specific individuals like Anjali had been successfully prosecuted, similar criminal enterprises continued to evolve and adapt their techniques to exploit new technologies and social platforms, while also incorporating traditional methods that remain difficult for conventional law enforcement to detect and counter effectively. The romantic relationship that developed between Michael and Rebecca Martinez, a bilingual social worker who specialized in helping families affected by international crime, required careful navigation of his trauma history, while also demonstrating that authentic love and trust were possible, even after experiencing devastating betrayal by someone who had systematically exploited his capacity for emotional intimacy. The cultural sensitivity that Rebecca brought to their relationship reflected her professional experience working with cross-cultural families, while also providing Michael with a perspective on healthy intercultural relationships that helped him distinguish between legitimate cultural differences and manipulative behavior designed to exploit cultural misunderstandings for criminal purposes. The family integration that occurred when Michael introduced Rebecca to his mother Linda required addressing the older woman's protective instincts and residual suspicion of women from different cultural backgrounds. Though Rebecca's professional credentials and genuine concern for Michael's well-being eventually earned Linda's trust and approval for their developing relationship, the psychological healing that Michael experienced through his relationship with Rebecca was facilitated by her understanding of trauma recovery, while also being challenged by his continued involvement in victim advocacy work that required him to regularly revisit his own experiences of deception and betrayal for the benefit of other families facing similar challenges. The international speaking engagements that Michael undertook as a victim advocate brought him to conferences and educational events around the world, where his personal story illustrated the sophisticated nature of modern identity fraud, while also demonstrating the possibility of recovery and renewed purpose after experiencing devastating criminal betrayal by trusted family members. The media appearances that Michael made in support of victim advocacy included television interviews, documentary participation, and podcast discussions that raised public awareness about staged disappearances, while also providing practical information about prevention and response strategies for individuals and families who might be vulnerable to similar deceptions. The legislative testimony that Michael provided to various government committees contributed to policy changes regarding international cooperation in criminal investigations, victim compensation programs, and prevention initiatives designed to protect vulnerable individuals from sophisticated fraud schemes that exploited cultural differences and family trust for criminal purposes. The academic collaborations that emerged from Michael's advocacy work included partnerships with universities and research institutions, studying the psychological impact of elaborate deception, contributing to scholarly understanding of trauma recovery, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions for victims of complex criminal schemes. The professional development that Michael pursued in victim advocacy included specialized training in trauma counseling, legal advocacy, and international crime investigation, enabling him to provide more effective support for other families while also contributing to improved prevention and response strategies within law enforcement and social service organizations. The community outreach programs that the Foundation developed under Michael's leadership included educational presentations for schools, community groups, and religious organizations, raising awareness about the warning signs of potential deception, while also providing practical guidance for maintaining appropriate skepticism without becoming paranoid or culturally prejudiced. The international partnerships that the Foundation established with similar organizations in other countries facilitated information sharing and collaborative research, while also providing resources for families dealing with cross-border crimes that required coordination between multiple legal systems and law enforcement agencies with different procedures and capabilities. The technological innovations that were developed through Foundation-funded research included improved systems for verifying identities and detecting fraudulent documents, while also supporting legitimate privacy protection and cultural sensitivity requirements that balanced security concerns with respect for individual rights and cultural diversity. The 10-year anniversary of discovering Anjali's survival marked a significant milestone in Michael's journey from victim to advocate, as he reflected on the personal transformation that had occurred through his pursuit of justice, while also recognizing the broader impact that his case had achieved in protecting other vulnerable families from similar exploitation and deception by trusted individuals. The psychological research that had grown out of his case continued to advance understanding of the long-term impact of systematic deception on family relationships, while also contributing to enhanced knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions and prevention strategies that could help both potential victims recognize dangerous situations and survivors recover from fundamental betrayal. The international law enforcement cooperation that had been essential for investigating Anjali's crimes had evolved into permanent frameworks for combating staged disappearances and identity fraud, with specialized units in multiple countries sharing intelligence and coordinating operations that had disrupted numerous criminal networks while establishing protocols for protecting vulnerable individuals. The victim support services that had been enhanced in response to his case continued to provide specialized assistance for families affected by staged disappearances, while also contributing to enhanced understanding of effective support systems that help survivors rebuild their capacity for trust and authentic relationships after experiencing systematic manipulation by trusted individuals. The educational impact of Michael's story extended far beyond formal prevention programs to include widespread public awareness about the dangers of elaborate deception and the importance of maintaining appropriate verification procedures even within trusted family and cultural relationships that might seem immune to criminal exploitation by sophisticated predators. The policy changes that his advocacy had helped achieve continued to influence law enforcement procedures and victim protection measures, while also establishing legal precedents for prosecuting complex fraud cases and providing compensation for families who had suffered extensive emotional and financial damage through systematic criminal deception by trusted family members. The technological solutions that had been developed in response to his case continued to provide enhanced fraud detection and prevention capabilities, while also supporting legitimate identity verification needs for businesses, institutions that needed to protect themselves and their customers from sophisticated criminal schemes without compromising privacy rights or cultural sensitivity. The corporate partnerships that the Foundation had established continued to produce innovative approaches to fraud prevention and victim support, while also providing resources for organizations that needed to balance security concerns with respect for cultural diversity and individual privacy rights in their operations and customer interactions with multicultural populations. The international cooperation agreements that had been negotiated as a result of his case continued to facilitate beneficial collaboration between law enforcement agencies while also supporting diplomatic relationships that balanced national sovereignty with international justice and victim protection in cases involving sophisticated transnational crimes that exploited jurisdictional boundaries. The ongoing monitoring of criminal networks revealed that while specific individuals like Anjali had been successfully prosecuted, similar criminal enterprises continued to evolve and adapt their techniques to exploit new technologies and social platforms, while also incorporating traditional methods that remain difficult for conventional law enforcement to detect and counter effectively. The marriage between Michael and Rebecca had provided him with a model of authentic intercultural relationship based on mutual respect and transparent communication, demonstrating that his capacity for love and trust could be rebuilt despite the devastating betrayal he had experienced through Anjali's systematic deception and criminal exploitation. The psychological treatment protocols that had been developed through Foundation research continued to provide specialized approaches for helping families recover from elaborate deception, while also addressing the unique challenges faced by communities whose cultural traditions and family practices had been exploited for criminal purposes by sophisticated predators. The establishment of international training programs for law enforcement officers investigating staged disappearances represented a lasting achievement of Michael's advocacy work, providing specialized education about the sophisticated techniques used by criminals, while also promoting cultural sensitivity and victim protection in cross-border investigations that required cooperation between agencies with different procedures and capabilities. The academic research center that the Foundation established at the University of Colorado continued to advance understanding of identity fraud and elaborate deception, while also training the next generation of law enforcement officers, social workers, and victim advocates who would carry forward improved prevention and response strategies for protecting vulnerable individuals and families. The documentary film that chronicled Michael's story and its broader implications for understanding modern identity fraud received international recognition and educational use, raising awareness about the sophisticated nature of contemporary criminal deception, while also illustrating the possibility of recovery and meaningful advocacy work following devastating personal betrayal. The legislative achievements that resulted from sustained advocacy efforts included comprehensive reforms to missing person investigation procedures, enhanced international cooperation requirements for criminal investigations, and improved victim compensation programs that recognize the long-term psychological and financial impact of elaborate deception schemes that exploited family relationships. The victim support network that had grown from Michael's initial advocacy now served hundreds of families annually, while also providing specialized training for mental health professionals and legal advocates who worked with survivors of complex criminal deception, contributing to improved understanding of effective therapeutic interventions and practical support strategies. The technological innovations that continued to emerge from Foundation-funded research included advanced systems for detecting fraudulent documents and verifying identities, while also protecting legitimate privacy rights and cultural practices that required balanced approaches to security concerns and individual protection from government surveillance or discrimination. The international partnerships that the Foundation maintained with similar organizations in dozens of countries facilitated ongoing information sharing and collaborative research, while also providing resources for families dealing with cross-border crimes that required coordination between multiple legal systems and cultural contexts with different procedures and expectations. The community education programs that had been developed reached thousands of individuals annually through schools, religious organizations, and community groups, providing practical information about recognizing warning signs of potential deception, while also promoting healthy skepticism that avoided cultural prejudice or paranoid suspicion of legitimate intercultural relationships. The professional development opportunities that the Foundation provided for law enforcement officers, social workers, and victim advocates included specialized training in trauma-informed investigation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and international cooperation procedures that improved outcomes for families affected by sophisticated criminal schemes that crossed jurisdictional boundaries. The ongoing case consultation services that the Foundation offered to law enforcement agencies and victim advocates around the world provided specialized expertise for investigating and responding to staged disappearances and identity fraud, while also contributing to improved understanding of emerging criminal techniques and effective countermeasures. The annual conference that brought together survivors, professionals, and researchers continued to advance knowledge about prevention and response strategies, while also providing opportunities for networking and collaboration that strengthened the global community of individuals dedicated to protecting vulnerable families from sophisticated criminal exploitation. The research publications that emerged from Foundation-supported studies contributed to academic understanding of the psychological and social factors that motivated elaborate deception, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions and prevention strategies that could protect potential victims and support survivors of systematic criminal betrayal. 15 years after Michael Harris believed his wife Angeli had died in a tragic accident in Mexico, only to discover that she had staged her death to escape their marriage and build a new life in Argentina under a false identity, his story continues to serve as both a cautionary tale about the sophisticated nature of modern deception and an inspiring example of how personal tragedy can be transformed into meaningful advocacy that protects vulnerable individuals worldwide. The Michael Harris Foundation has become an internationally recognized institution that has directly assisted over 800 families affected by staged disappearances and identity fraud, while also funding research and policy initiatives that have contributed to systematic improvements in fraud prevention, victim protection, and international law enforcement cooperation across dozens of countries and cultural contexts. The legislative changes that his advocacy helped achieve have been adopted across numerous jurisdictions and have contributed to more effective prosecution of staged disappearances and identity fraud, while also providing enhanced resources for victims and their families who need support navigating complex legal systems and recovery processes that are complicated by international boundaries and cultural factors. The international law enforcement cooperation that was essential for investigating Angeli's crimes has evolved into permanent frameworks for combating elaborate deception schemes, with specialized units sharing intelligence and coordinating operations that have disrupted hundreds of criminal networks, while also establishing protocols for protecting vulnerable individuals from systematic manipulation, exploitation. The victim support services that were enhanced in response to his case continue to provide specialized assistance for individuals and families affected by staged disappearances and identity fraud, while also contributing to enhanced understanding of effective therapeutic interventions that help survivors rebuild their capacity for trust and authentic relationships after experiencing fundamental betrayal. The relationship between Michael and Rebecca, now married for 8 years with 2 young children, demonstrates that authentic love and trust are possible even after experiencing devastating betrayal, though their relationship required careful development and ongoing commitment to transparency and emotional honesty that honored both their individual healing needs and cultural backgrounds. The technological innovations that have resulted from Foundation-funded research continue to provide enhanced fraud detection and prevention capabilities, while also supporting legitimate identity verification needs for businesses, institutions that must balance security concerns with respect for individual privacy and cultural diversity in their operations and community interactions. The educational impact of Michael's advocacy work extends beyond formal prevention programs to include widespread public awareness about the dangers of elaborate deception and the importance of maintaining appropriate verification and procedures even within trusted family and cultural relationships that might seem immune to criminal exploitation by sophisticated predators. The ongoing impact of his advocacy work extends beyond individual protection to include systematic improvements in international cooperation, victim support, and fraud prevention that continue to evolve in response to new criminal techniques, while maintaining focus on the human cost of crimes that exploit cultural traditions and family relationships for predatory purposes. The story of Michael Harris serves as a permanent reminder that while cultural diversity and intercultural relationships represent some of humanity's most valuable opportunities for growth and understanding, these meaningful connections must be balanced with appropriate awareness of the sophisticated criminals who exploit cultural differences and family trust to facilitate devastating crimes. His legacy lives on through the thousands of potential victims who have been protected by the awareness programs his advocacy made possible, the hundreds of families who have received support through his foundation's services, and the systematic improvements in law enforcement and victim protection that emerged from his comprehensive response to personal tragedy, ensuring that his suffering was ultimately transformed into lasting positive change that continues to benefit vulnerable individuals and families worldwide.